Okay, come one, come all to the President's Day tier ranking of United States presidents. All about 45 of them, I think, unless someone didn't put, yeah, Donald Trump included, so 45 presidents.
Well, I mean, we had what's his name? Grover Cleveland had two non-consecutive terms, so I don't know
Is
how
that,
we
so was he considered the two different presidents numerically?
we'll just get this out of the way first. So we're going to cover Grover Cleveland's two terms in separate tiers, or are we going to cover him just his
I
entire
think we'll just do
one?
overall for Cleveland for anyone.
Okay,
Like I'm not going to do, Rose like FDR's like four different terms as different presidencies. You know what I mean? Consecutive or non-consecutive, I don't think it matters. Um, anyway,
okay.
so we could so 45 presidents, kind of a lot, but there's also a lot of information out there about these guys. So, you know, uh, opinions may vary. Anyway, uh, starting off, we have the indubitable George Washington. What do you think, Evan, for George Washington?
I mean, I think he'd have to go in the A tier for no other reason than he was basically the founder of our country. The thing is with George Washington is as a general, I mean, he was actually not, extremely that good as general. I mean, he actually lost, he got disgraced during the French and Indian War, but during the American Revolution, he was just kind of the most high profile figure who would, sort of serve as the standard for the colonists who were rebelling. They would take it, they could
Yeah,
get it that.
yeah, I know. And to be fair, a lot of military officers, field commanders, and so forth, they don't really like always start out good in their early career. Like they have to kind of learn how to manage an army. And Washington did that. I mean, he wasn't a great offensive general by any means, but
He lost more battles than he won.
he lost more, but he won just the right ones, And he kept the troops alive in harsh winters and in a war that they didn't really know anything. There wasn't really a strong precedent for it, right?
And he was better at long-term strategy than general, tactics, like forming alliances with the French, sort of playing the propaganda war. He did that very skillfully.
Yeah, I mean,
About like
he had allies that were with the Germans and the French. It's kind of which is back then, I guess it made more sense, but you don't see a lot of that later on in subsequent American terrestrial wars. Anyway, so his
as a
presidency
president.
is what we're really gonna factor in for this decision. Everything else he did might be all well and good, but the presidency is sort of the linchpin. And how do you favor his presidency, Evan?
Um, well, during his presidency, I mean, he did the Jay Treaty. He kind of they had the Whiskey Rebellion and other elements during his presidency. That was the only real sort of strife that was kind of happening at the time. Um, but his presidency also his speeches are really well known. Like his farewell speech has become well not infamous but famous as kind of speeches of like that embodies what a president should be.
Yeah, I'll give him a B. I just don't think as president he had to deal with a lot of adversity.
Well, yeah, and like no one would want to challenge his political dominance because like everyone he's like a saint to the Americans. Like there was no even controversial to be the first president.
I think his policies weren't necessarily that high risk, and I think he was resting on his laurels as a war hero.
Was there an A tier and an S tier?
There's an
So
S tier, an A tier, and everything beneath. Except there's no F tier, which is disappointing. But I
I think
guess
we should just do an A tier because like even though he might have a lot, he's still like the founder of the nation. I think that's at least worthy of that.
yeah, but I don't subscribe to the whole founder effect. I think that's sort of like, quasi religious. I'm gonna put him in B because I think if it weren't for his like, his reputation as a general, I don't think he would have been regarded that well. Or I mean regarded as highly as he often is regarded, right, in the classrooms, the patriotic, you know, uh reputation he has. There's a little. I think a lot of his high gloss is attributable to just sort of crass patriotism, but it has nothing to do with his policies um, as an administrator. So I give him a B out of respect. I'm not gonna give him like a B minus. I'll give him like a squarely B rating.
Okay. So let's go on to John Adams. We're only making the presidential activity, not like beforehand, because
Exactly. If we are gonna do his whole career, I'd give him an S, but I can't do that. It's just ethically.
okay,
Okay, next, John Adams.
yeah,
Okay, John Adams.
most sort of negative mark in the career would be the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were kind of tyrannical, but at the same time, like he won the first competitive election in the sort of United States of the Federalist Party against Thomas Jefferson.
That's the other thing. Did George Washington even have an election?
Basically, it was just I think like all the states just sent delegates to say he was. It was just really like a shoe in, but John Adams and Thomas Jefferson did.
Yeah, so John Adams was the first president to win an election, but his policies were really bad. I mean, not like like Civil War level or something, but they just he was paranoid about France, and he was even and he was also paranoid about America with the Alien Sedition Act, and he just kind of he tried to like force everyone into like agreeing with this war against France that never amounted, and even France didn't want to do it. And he was sort of just like he didn't have that long of a term. I think it was one term president.
Yeah.
He just spent 4 years sort of like um, gathering storm for something that never reified. So I would give him a C plus, maybe a C. What do you think?
Um, I guess. I mean, like, if in terms of effectiveness or just like how good their policies were, just like in terms of like moral.
Well, I think he towed the line. He didn't like unravel the nation as the second president and the first elected one. There's kind of a lot of pressure to sort of be militant and vigilant and all this. And he
Yeah,
did that, but he did it in a paranoid fashion that was sort of his undoing.
well, kind of having a quasi war with France, who had just like a couple decades ago helped them with the revolution. He was what's known as like an Anglophone, which is he wanted to reestablish better ties with the British and was more skeptical of the French. Whereas Thomas Jefferson was the opposite. He
Well, keep in mind, okay, before he was president, he was a delegate for for the Continental Congress to Britain, and he did a good job there. And then as president, he had to deal with the Directory because the French Revolution had already happened, and so the France no longer had a monarch, and Napoleon hadn't ascended yet. So he was kind of dealing with like a weird political situation in France. So his paranoia was somewhat warranted, but I just think he went too far with it, and he was seen as sort of slightly deranged. Um, I'll give him a C plus because he didn't, despite his craziness, he didn't totally unravel the country.
okay. All right, Thomas Jefferson. I think obviously the biggest thing of Thomas Jefferson was the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, he won that. Also, he won against John Adams in the first, sort of peaceful transfer of power. From one party from the Federalist to the Anti-Federalist.
Where is he on? Oh, here he is. Here he is. Yeah, Jefferson's pretty remarkable. He basically doubled the size of the country, more or less, without really a lot of politicking involved. I think James Madison was the Secretary of State at the time, and he was the one who sort of negotiated the deal with Napoleon for all this land, west of the Mississippi, right? Or yeah. And so all this French territory was sold by the Napoleonic government for like shillings on the dollar, um, shillings on the pound, I mean, or whatever it is. And he he kind of enshrined himself as a great president just by doing that. He had some other things in his career that were pretty awesome, but a lot of his accomplishments were post and pre-presidency, like founding University of Virginia or writing the Jefferson Bible or just Declaration of Independence. He composed that. So a lot of his accomplishments are not really his presidency, but even as a president, he was insanely good. So I'm gonna give him an A.
And he engaged in one of the first successful foreign wars against the Barbary pirates. That were kind of
Oh, that's
Founding.
right. Yeah, of course. I forgot about that. He accomplished what John Adams could not accomplish by staving off a European sort of conflict. So I'll give him an S because just for Louisiana Purchase, really.
The Embargo Act, which basically was trying to put leverage by saying, like, to protect American shipping by saying that, we're going to temporarily, ban all, foreign imports into the United States. I mean, it was not really successful. I mean, the United States just didn't have that much leverage at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
He was lucky to be in between John Adams and James Madison because Madison, like Adams, had policies against the British, not the French, but the British that didn't end up working out. And it had to do with naval when what basically American sailors were forced into some kind of what's it called when the British Navy forced them to fight their
they,
war?
they basically, it's called impressment,
Impressment, yeah,
yeah, basically forcing them into their navy.
to fight for against Napoleon. So it Jefferson was kind of lucky in a way because he was in between. He was like the least paranoid of these sort of and most tactful of these anti kind of. He didn't really go
It was kind
against any European power. He just went against piracy, which I think was the smart move. So I'll give him an S for
yeah,
all things.
impressment was kind of weird. Like the British basically, like they,
We can get to that now though, because we're on James Madison next.
yeah, but with the impressment, just one more thing. At least on paper, like Britain, with the Treaty of Paris, accepted the United States independence, but they still really considered the Americans, sort of British subjects at heart. So they thought like the compulsion then with the impressments was, at least somewhat justified. I mean, even though like the Americans really didn't like it, and he tried to push back on it, Thomas Jefferson. So what are you putting him on? What tier?
I put Jefferson on. Wait, was impressment was under Madison, I thought.
No, that was Jefferson was the Embargo Act to push against it.
Oh, was it effective?
No, it did. They just didn't have a lot of leverage at the time.
Okay, so I'm gonna. But
Also,
Did Madison continue the policy?
but another thing with Jefferson was he signed the law that would eventually ban slavery imports, even though he was a slave owner himself. Kind of.
Yeah, someone did he outlaw slave trade on the ocean?
No,
Or
he said new slaves can't be shipped in. I think past like 1830 or something. It put like basically like a deadline and like when the slave, not slavery itself, but the slave trade, like importing new slaves in.
yeah, I'll keep him at S. I mean, he's a little bit lower for the impressment embargo failing, but I still think he's top of the top, top of the heap. Um,
And now James Madison.
James Madison had a very interesting pre-presidential founding father career. Obviously wrote Federalist Papers. He, like I said, he was a Secretary of State, very very involved in the Louisiana Purchase. So on paper, you'd think he'd do really well, but unfortunately, he experienced the War of 1812. Britain invaded, um, and he just sort of, that White House got burned down. He had he didn't really ever have a standout kind of, singular accomplishment like Jefferson did as president. So he's actually, I think he considered unfair as a
Well, he also created the second bank of the United States, which would cause a lot of sort of politics around it the past next decades with Jackson and stuff like that.
that was probably the thing because Jackson may have destroyed it, but that created the panic of the 1830s. So James Madison maybe might be slightly better than John Adams. I would put minus.
So I'm kind of having trouble hearing you. It's kind
Oh,
of,
okay, James Madison B minus slightly above John Adams because he was financially sensible.
wait, so I'm that you can you cue the audio or something? Sorry, it's like kind of breaking up a little bit. I don't know. You still there? Yeah, it's just kind of like really, the audio is kind of like fuzzy. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I don't know. This might be this computer. I'm not really sure. I'm going to James Madison B minus.
Okay, but he was the first, he was one of the only presidents like to basically fight a war on other than Lincoln on U.S. soil. Basically. Yeah, but still B minus.
He might have been higher than John Adams because he's financially sensible, fiscally responsible.
Yeah, can you just fix the audio for a second? What's going on?
I just try to not worry about it because there's nothing I can do.
Hmm.
So, next one up, James Monroe.
Okay, I'm having trouble hearing you. That's the thing. It's just kind of. Hold on. Are you still recording? Can I just call you back on the audio?
Okay, we're back with James Monroe after some audio interference, or lack thereof. Trevorrow's presidential portrait, is that it? It's kind of hard to figure out what this guy's portrait was. Okay, here. James Monroe is actually a really good president, underrated.
Best known for the Monroe Doctrine.
Monroe Doctrine was kind of crazy, but he was actually also known for the Missouri Compromise, right? Am I thinking, or am I confused?
Yeah, basically like the compromise would obviously fall apart later in the decades, but it was kind of like a compromise around how slavery would expand. I mean that obviously the
He
Civil War
banned
still
slavery
wasn't successful.
north of the Arkansas border, all the way up to Maine, effectively making like much of the country, like nominally slave free, so.
Yeah, it wouldn't be successful in the long term, but in the short term, it kind of kept the peace for a little bit.
Yeah, it wouldn't be successful. Like a lot of the policies against slavery before the Civil War, they just made everyone angry, and they kind of stirred contention. But it sets a precedent for how abolition would sort of like snowball into a fully formed policy that was efficacious. Trying
He
to find
also
his,
expanded. He acquired Florida during his term, so he did expand the United States.
he acquired Florida, but he didn't inaugurate. No, did he? Did he acquire Florida? I think Jackson did that.
No, it was Monroe who acquired
Did he
Florida.
get it acquired
From
legally from
Spain.
Spain? Yeah, but it
Yeah.
was uninhabited. Okay, because they had to get rid
Well,
of
it had the Seminole tribe.
yeah. So, but he got it legally, but no one was able to inhabit it because of all the Seminole Indians. So let me find his portrait.
I mean, he's kind of like a president whose legacy matters more than what he did during his, actual term in terms of impact.
Well, he also said a lot. He said he was a president that set a lot of precedents.
Yeah.
Like the Monroe Doctrine in 31 was kind of like telling America that their mission on Earth is to defend all the rest of the Americas from colonial interest, as well as interest in the West Coast from the Russians to take over whatever was there in the frontier. So yeah, I would say what's your ranking for him?
I would say well, A or upper B or lower A tier. I'd say probably lower A tier.
Okay, I'll give him a B with George Washington. I think he was about as effective as strictly president as George Washington.
Now we have John Quincy Adams.
John Quincy Adams did not have the most amazing career. He was a little bit like his father, kind of a spoiled Harvard man. He never really launched any initiatives to send the country in some flashy direction.
He did fund infrastructure in the arts, sort of.
He was very passionate about establishing a modern university,
yeah,
and having it be sort of the national university. But there were so many critics of it that it just never came to fore.
Yeah, he was very focused on trying to, just kind of do light touches, some little reforms or projects within the United States and making any big changes. I mean, I would say probably lower tier just because he didn't have a ton of accomplishments. Probably,
he was a respected guy, and he served as Secretary of
He didn't
State.
have any major fuck ups, but he didn't have a lot of accomplishments
I
either.
think he was rather old when he became president too, like because he'd just been around for so long. Let me find his portrait. Um,
I mean, a lot of his stuff he had an agenda, but he just couldn't get it passed. A lot of it, so he made kind of minor, changes mostly.
I think this is okay. Is he the one with the small head? Um, I will give him like I don't know if I want to give him just like his dad a C plus. Uh, let me think if there's anything. I mean, he was outspokenly opposed to slavery. It doesn't really mean anything. I don't.
I'd say just a little bit below
Ambassador
that.
to Russia.
But
Uh,
when he's doing stuff during his presidency,
yeah, the Erie Canal was completed while he was in office. I
I don't know
don't.
how he had to do with that though. I mean,
It doesn't seem like he would have a lot to do with it. I guess he's kind of a lame duck. I'll give him a C
okay.
below his dad. He's the lowest one on the list so far.
Now we have Andrew Jackson. I mean, who he was monumental. I mean, in terms of being a trailblazer as president.
Yeah, he's also incredibly insensitive to Native Americans. He basically
Yeah,
ousted
I
them
mean,
during the Trail of
morally,
Tears,
you
and he
say,
he went to war against the Seminoles in Florida, which effectively conquered Florida and made it like inhabitable to
yeah, you
settlers.
can you can talk about morally about what he did, but in terms of effectiveness, it was no doubt effective.
He was
Sort of
very
clearing up the
effective
land.
militarily. He liked to push people around. He won a lot of duels in his life, and he was a war hero in the Battle of New Orleans in 1812.
He
Uh,
established the second bank. He kind
he abolished
of
it. You mean?
he set the stage for annexing Texas when he recognized Texas. And
He
the thing
recognized
is about
Texas?
he basically he did keep the Union together basically because there was like sort of crisis where South Carolina threatened to secede over a tariff, and then basically he said he was going to use military force if they didn't, and they backed off. So he kind of averted what could have been a first civil war. It was about tariffs, not about slavery at that point, though. But he was definitely, and he was just in terms of like his skills at reaching out to the people. He's sort of like a Donald Trump of that era, kind of, just sort of like this brash populist.
I don't think he recognized the Republic of Texas though. He didn't.
Yeah, he didn't annex it, but that set the stage for them to annex it, sort of later.
Oh, I guess it has some value. I'll give him an A. I'll give him an A. I think he knew when to sort of show force, and I also think that he was willing to do the dirty work in order to make the country stronger in the long run. Now, there's still this controversy about the Trail of Tears. I mean, is that a demerit, do you think? Or do you think it was sort of there's a statute of limitations and that kind of thing?
What is?
Just ousting, deporting all the indigenous.
Well, like I said, you can debate how moral it was. It was definitely, most people I say now was immoral, but it was effective because it cleared up a lot
It
of
was
land.
effective, and okay, I'll give him an A because of all of his policies combined. If it weren't for the Trail of Tears being so morally devastating, probably give him an S, honestly.
And there's Martin Van Buren. I mean, Martin Van Buren. Let's go to him. He was kind of elected on the legacy of Andrew Jackson a lot from the
Yeah,
Democrat,
yeah, yeah.
the second Democratic president, but he didn't do a ton. I mean, he basically he bungled the response to the Panic of
Oh,
1837.
oh,
With
wait, sorry. Jackson, I have to lower Jackson because when he destroyed the second bank, he fucked up the economy, and it led to this panic with Martin Van Buren, right?
yeah, the Panic of 1837. But I mean,
So I'm gonna give him a B minus because I think combined with the Trail of Tears and just creating this panic, it's not that great.
yeah, a lot of him was just kind of continuing policies Jackson had already set in place, like Indian removal, or with Florida, the Seminole War. He didn't. Uh, he
Okay,
didn't.
okay, I'll put Jackson at a B with Jefferson. Sorry, not Jefferson. Washington and James Monroe.
Yeah.
Okay, he's at B because he was he was rough around the edges, and he stirred trouble more than anyone really. I feel like he needed to, but who knows?
Hey, Van Buren is D tier since he didn't have any accomplishments
No,
other than
Van Buren's trash. Yeah,
other than what was put in place with Jackson, and the only crisis he kind of really bungled, you know.
he just scrambled. I mean, to resolve the economic, inflationary crisis, but it didn't. It's not like he could have done much else. He was the I think he was the last Whig president, the last and he was also the first one to be born American citizen, and he has this iconic haircut.
Yeah, and he lost re-election to who are going to. What are we going to put him in D tier?
I'll give him a Martin Van Buren. I'll give him a D plus.
Okay. Then he lost re-election to the one we're going to talk about. That was interesting mostly because of how short his term was William Henry Harrison. He died, I think it was like 100 or something days into his term because of like an illness that some people say he got because, of how long his speech was, with his inauguration. But William Henry Harrison, we can rank him for, I mean, even though he's kind of like indecisive about what he do as president just because we're so short.
Was he a war hero in 1812? Didn't William Henry Harrison take down Tecumseh's army? I think the reason.
Yeah, he won the Battle of Tippecanoe before his presidency, but his presidency was so short, there was really nothing.
It was a month. Yeah, or less than. He's going to be E tier, I have to say.
But he was considered like a sort of celebrity because of that. That's what a lot of what drove his campaign to winning. I mean, he was a prideful guy. That's probably and he did have accomplishments beforehand. So can we be fair to rank him on that? I mean, let's just say like C minus since he didn't do much, but he did something before his term. That distinguished him.
No, I'm going to give him an E because I think if you die in office, you get everything. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, die early.
Yeah, you die after before a month's over.
Okay. Now there's John Tyler, who was his vice president who took over after him. His most consequential act was the annexing of Texas. He was the one who signed the order to officially do it. That would later, sort of start the Mexican-American War at the time.
1 second, I'm trying to find his portrait. Where William Henry Harrison's portrait?
Oh, William Henry Harrison.
Oh, he's got a funny visage. He's really severe looking. Long face. Is this? I think this is him. Okay, E tier. Okay, now who's next?
John Tyler, who took over for him.
John Tyler. Okay, maybe that's who I have as for. They look similar.
The most consequential act he did was the annexation of Texas. That would later lead to the Mexican-American War. He kind of did that, I think, near the end of his term.
John Tyler was okay. Yeah, he's better than.
He did some treaties with the UK and China, basically. So he kind of shored up United States on foreign policy, but overall, he didn't do a ton during his. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You kind of the audio is kind of breaking up a little bit again. Sorry, the audio is kind of messed up. Hey, can you fix the audio for a second?
All right, we're back with John Tyler after some more audio interference or the lack thereof. We have William Henry Harrison at E because he died in less than a month into his term, and then we have John Tyler at C. You think C is okay for John Tyler?
Yeah, the biggest thing was leading to the Mexican American War, but that would be what James K. Polk presided over the annexation of
John Tyler
Texas.
had some capable policies with the foreign policy measures. I think he's at John Adams level personally. I'm gonna put him at C plus.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess he was, yeah. So like in terms of legacy,
He's kind of underrated in a sense because he wasn't horrible, but he's also so obscure. I don't think he's really that bad of a president, all told.
hmm.
But C plus is still not a good rating. It's just it's above average, let's say. So it's a little bit maybe on
But
par.
he did it right at the end of his term, annexing Texas. It's basically just saying, like, and that's y'all. Now this
Well,
clusterfuck will
yeah,
fall on Jay.
and Andrew
You know,
Jackson at the end of his term recognized the Republic of Texas. I mean, he's trying to copy Jackson as much as he can, and he seems like he's bureaucratically sort of trapped in the office. He's not the strong man that Jackson was. He's more of like a pencil pusher or whatever.
yeah.
Anyway, so who's after
James
John
K.
Tyler?
led America through the Mexican American War, one of the first real big foreign policy victories in terms of United States wars.
Wait,
You
who
know,
who are we talking about? Tyler?
Polk, James
Polk.
K.
Oh, James
Polk.
K. Polk is one of my favorite presidents. I would put him at S tier.
Yeah, like winning the Mexican American War, expanding the United States.
He doubled the size of the United States almost.
Yeah, ever since
He got
Tom,
Oregon and Washington from Britain by some very intriguing connivance there, where he negotiated some sort of um, relinquishment of those territories. I guess they didn't matter that much back then. And he also got California. Uh, he effectively got California. It was, I think, New Mexico was these territories that were won from Mexico were not necessarily territories yet. They were just sort of possessions. It would take a minute before they were actually recognized even as territories.
he also changed the tariff policy. Like reduce the tariffs so that way the United States was imposing with the Walker tariff. He reestablished the independent treasury. I mean, but the biggest thing was definitely the Mexican American War.
Okay, I'm gonna put him at S. I think he's up there with Jefferson.
Then there was Zachary Taylor. Um, he wasn't. He was another one who wasn't president for that long.
Also like William Henry Harrison, he was a war hero in the Mexican-American War, very outstanding. He won battles at Buena Vista outside Mexico City that helped in the invasion of Mexico under Winfield Scott, and then he also won a battle at Monterey. So yeah, he was a decorated Mexican-American war hero, and that was part of the reason why he was elected. But his politics are rather vague. I think people just sort of were riding on the coattails of his celebrity when they voted him in, and he died rather bluntly into
Taylor,
office.
Zachary Taylor.
Yeah, Zachary Taylor. I'm not a big fan of Zachary Taylor. I think he's sort of a
Kind of, he didn't. A lot of people say he didn't really, care about his job that much. He was like sort of lazy a little bit.
yeah. I mean, he doesn't seem like he cared a lot about anything.
Hmm.
As president goes. Uh, let's see his
But he was a general from the Mexican American War. He's trying to boasting on that celebrity to get into office after James K. Polk. But he did die 2 years later. So I don't know how much his, sort of, laziness can be attributed to whatever disease he had, but it still affected the country.
I guess he was a Whig.
Yeah.
Weird. Uh, yeah. I just I mean, they say he set the stage for the Compromise of 1850.
Yeah.
Uh, so, I mean, he encouraged the territories in California and New Mexico to, like, vie for statehood. I don't, he's a weird kind of like, like,
Well, it was Millard Fillmore who was more involved with the Compromise of 1850.
no, I know. I'm trying to find his portrait right now. I think Zachary Taylor is definitely, he's also from Orange County, Virginia. A lot of people from Orange County, Virginia become president. I just think there's something kind of cool about Zachary Taylor, but it's like it's superficial, and I don't. As a president, it really shows in the fact that he died of like a stomach cancer or whatever. A couple years in, I can't find a portrait for him because every portrait on the internet is him in like his military uniform, but the portraits here, he's not in the military uniform. Maybe so. I'm just going off face. Oh, here is this it? I think this is it. No. Okay, I think this is him. What would you give him? A C minus?
Or Taylor.
Yeah,
Fillmore or Taylor? Which one?
Taylor. Taylor.
Oh, a C minus, yeah.
Okay. He did very well for the amount of time he was president. And then how about the next one
So
is
you had the biggest thing was the Compromise of 1850. He also was in office, I think, like 3 years. I think he finished uh
Millard
Zachary.
Fillmore? Are you talking about Millard Fillmore?
Yeah.
Yeah, Millard Fillmore was a pretty good president. He actually was the first one to inaugurate California as a state. So I think he's viewed less favorably than he should be,
Well, the slave
underappreciated. And he did the Compromise of 1850.
well, had the Fugitive Slave Act exacerbated tensions over slavery. Yeah, I mean, but okay. So, can you fix the? You still there? Hey, I can't. The audio is kind of messed up. Uh, hey, the audio is still messed up. Millard Fillmore. I'd say like a C, B minus maybe. Yeah, I just wanted you to fix the audio because I have trouble.
Okay, we're back at it again after more technical difficulties. We're talking about Franklin Pierce and the Kansas-Nebraska Act.
Yeah, Franklin Pierce was an interesting guy because he was a president from New Hampshire, but he was like against the abolition movement. He was more of a Confederate or what at the time would be like pro-slavery, sympathizer, and he signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act that sort of undid the Missouri Compromise and says like basically states can decide their own, slavery, and it lead to bleeding Kansas. I mean, it's basically like, a lot of his legacy is not that good, let's just say.
Yeah, he kind of was this typical conservative who had to stymie progress, kind of a bulwark for the old guard in a sense. I could see how some people would sort of find him charming. I He was a little bit of maybe a blowhard. Uh, uh,
Yeah.
But you know what? I do like that he signed the Gadsden Purchase. You ever heard of the Gadsden Purchase?
Yeah.
That was where the southernmost part of a region in Arizona was bought from Mexico, and so you get like Tucson and a bunch of small towns like Yuma and Tombstone and Bisbee are brought into the fold of the continental U.S. He signed that, and that's like something a little obscure, but it was a territorial acquisition and a significant one in terms of square mileage. So keep in mind that he might have been a douchebag and a tool in terms of the way he regarded abolition, but in terms of territorial expansion, he wasn't bad. He was better than average. Uh, so I will
So,
give him. Who did I give C to? I'll give him a C. He had
hmm.
he had a couple good strokes in there, but overall it was kind of a douche. Um,
Let's now James Buchanan. He was the president sort of that had the most to do with setting the stage for the Civil War, as like immediately preceding it.
James Buchanan, I think wasn't he sort of a lame duck?
I think he only served one term. Yeah, he only served. He said from the get go he'd only served one term.
He was a dark horse and a lame duck. Sounds like okay.
Yeah.
Um, was he the last president named James? We've had
I
we've
don't,
had, we've had more than a few. Okay.
yeah, but so he basically presided over Kansas entering the Union as a slave state. He presided over the Dred Scott decision. He, completely. I think he presided over the raid on Harper's Ferry. He kind of completely failed to de-escalate any tensions before the Civil War. He had no real notable accomplishments. Let's just say.
I think like Martin Van Buren, he sort of presided over a bunch of bullshit, couldn't do much about it, and persisted as a lame duck. I'll give him a D plus.
You mean Martin Van Buren or James Buchanan?
No, I think he's similar. I think Martin Van Buren had the financial crisis, and James Buchanan had all the pre-war bullshit.
Yeah, but he like what he did set the stage for the Civil War. So I'd say even lower.
Yeah, you want me to give him an E or a D?
Yeah,
Okay, I'll give him a D.
accomplishments. He just failed to intervene and
You know what? I'll
then.
give it an E because yeah, you're right. He just didn't. I mean, he allowed a major war, the most violent war in our history to happen. So yeah, I'll give him an E.
Now we come to a little known president named Abe Lincoln.
Oh yeah, I mean this guy's pretty obscure. I'm surprised we're even talking about him. Came from a
um,
small town in Illinois, right? And then also lived in Kentucky. I mean, it's like it's all over the place. Like no one even knows what he's into. Like he seems like he doesn't even have like a real background, right? It's just like like a log cabin guy. I mean, it's kind of a bullshit. It's kind of a shoe-in. Um,
let's just obviously I think obviously leading the United States through the Civil War, like basically the only, civil war in the history and coming out successfully at the end.
yeah,
I,
I think he's an
Abe
S. I think I would consider him an S because he had to deal with that fucking war that he didn't even start.
I mean, the thing is, he got assassinated like early in his second term. He would have to deal with a lot of the minutia of trying to bring it into the union, but he ended up avoiding that. So because he died so early on.
Didn't that was his
But
second
it,
term. So I mean, he did a full term.
yeah, he did. But he got assassinated early in his second term. But like that's the thing. Like so, the things that whatever.
And he won the war too. So think about it like that. He was fighting, another country essentially, the Confederacy, and he won as the commander in chief. He has to be an S. He's the only president really to do that.
Yeah, I mean, he
To
he
fight a
died.
war against a country that borders our own and win. I guess James K. Polk. He and James
Well,
K.
yeah,
Polk were the only ones to do that.
like literally the country was falling apart and he ended up winning. It's not just a war against another nation. It's literally
Yeah, I
you
mean
know
it's way more consequential
saving.
and disastrous than the Mexican American War. Uh,
Yeah, obviously S tier, I'd say.
Yeah, and obviously the legacy of and baggage of the Civil War is far, I think, even worse than probably the Mexican American War, although they are comparable. Um,
So Andrew Johnson came in after Lincoln was assassinated. He was sort of dealing with a lot of the stuff that would have fallen on Lincoln about the
he was
detail.
he was a little more conservative than Lincoln, and he kind of
Basically, his idea, he wanted to reintegrate the South as quickly as possible, and you had like the sort of what you called radical Republicans who wanted to be aggressive and sort of pushing for enfranchising newly freed slaves, and he just kind of that ended up leading to his impeachment.
Yeah, he
Ultimately,
was impeached, and he really
really,
bungled the reintegration. A lot of
yeah,
people got, it was a violent time, right? Like a lot of the, it was starting to be the Jim Crow era. A lot of black people got murdered. A lot of anger in the country still. He didn't have an easy job though. Like think about it. Like, I mean, I don't think I could do it, but what do you think? He didn't. He just didn't have really a lot of merit. He was sort of a crisis
yeah,
manager.
yeah, and he kind of he couldn't handle both the country and his own Congress, sort of his own government, so he got impeached.
Do you think maybe a C plus or a C minus or somewhere in the C area?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give him a C minus because he got impeached. But it's not an easy job. Uh,
Now we go to Ulysses S. Grant, who was
okay, a lot of people do not like his presidency, but I think his presidency is better.
yeah, he at least temporarily managed Reconstruction better than Andrew Johnson, like basically getting rid of the Klan and everything
He was a
else.
lot better at Reconstruction than Andrew Johnson. I would put him as maybe a C plus or a B minus.
He advanced civil service reform basically to try. He did the first steps in trying to get rid of the patronage system that predominated with the federal government. And then so I mean, still there? Sorry, so you're kind of breaking up again. Can I hear? Yeah, B minus or C? Well, probably B minus, I'd say. But I can't really hear you. I'm not really. Sorry. Okay, yeah. Can you just reset the audio for a second?